morning. This is Environmental Intelligence, episode 52. It's July 3rd, 2026. Wrapping up the week with the environmental developments you need to know heading into the weekend. Federal pipeline routing steps to Delta, BC now link directly to Roberts Bank Terminal 2 expansion under overlapping federal and provincial approvals. Federal announcements on pipeline routing to the Lower Mainland coincide with BC protected areas advances and port terminal planning. Separate federal green finance rule development continues to exclude upstream fossil fuel activities. Practitioners handling linear infrastructure and port-related contaminated sites should track interjurisdictional triggers this week. If you only note one thing today for your compliance calendar, map current project footprints against the proposed Southern Pipeline Corridor and Roberts Bank Terminal 2 alignment. Consultants managing Phase 1 or 2 ESAs, risk assessments, and Fisheries Act authorizations on Lower Mainland linear and marine projects face the immediate review. Alberta EPEA and federal IAA coordination remains the dominant Western Canada focus. Federal steps announced for a southern pipeline route to the Lower Mainland will terminate near Vancouver while explicitly avoiding the northern tanker ban area. The route aligns with planned expansion at Roberts Bank Terminal 2, requiring coordinated federal impact assessment and BC environmental assessment processes. Previous routing proposals had not explicitly tied marine terminal capacity increases to oil transport infrastructure. Consultants conducting baseline studies or preparing effects assessments for port or pipeline projects must now evaluate cumulative marine and terrestrial impacts under both the Impact Assessment Act and BC Environmental Management Act. Next steps include federal provincial work on protected areas boundaries that could constrain right-of-way options. Watch for Canada Gazette notices on any consequential amendments to marine terminal approvals. Federal green finance rules continue to exclude upstream fossil fuel production and transport activities from eligible categories. This affects project financing classifications for any contaminated site remediation tied to oil and gas infrastructure. No specific effective date was announced. Mark Carney stated that current carbon emissions targets threaten national unity and are not sustainable. The statement directly references federal climate policy architecture without proposing specific regulatory amendments. Practitioners should note potential future adjustments to carbon pricing or offset frameworks affecting site closure economics. BC Container Terminal expansion at Roberts Bank is advancing in tandem with the Southern Pipeline proposal. This creates new requirements for integrated marine sediment and upland soil assessments under federal Port Authority processes. Timeline implications for terminal-related remediation projects remain unspecified. If you're working on linear infrastructure projects in British Columbia, review federal pipeline routing documents against current Lower Mainland project footprints for IAA trigger implications. Update client briefings on green finance taxonomy exclusions for any oil and gas site remediation financing. Monitor BC protected areas boundary announcements for constraints on pipeline corridor options. Cross-check Roberts Bank Terminal 2 expansion filings for sediment quality data relevant to nearby upland sites. Ongoing federal BC coordination on Southern Pipeline Route and protected areas designations continues into next week. Continued federal green finance taxonomy consultation process remains active. Alberta BC interprovincial alignment discussions on pipeline environmental requirements are also scheduled. There's a nuance here worth understanding on overlapping IAA and BC EMA triggers. A client submits a single work plan for a pipeline corridor that crosses both federal and provincial assessment triggers. Yet the baseline data packages do not align on spatial boundaries or valued component selection. The Impact Assessment Act requires consideration of cumulative effects from marine terminal expansion, while the BC Environmental Management Act focuses on site-specific contaminated soil and groundwater pathways. Experienced assessors recognize that federal marine shipping components often pull in Fisheries Act and Species at Risk Act considerations that provincial submissions treat as separate. The practical distinction lies in how each regime handles the temporal boundary. Federal processes extend to reasonably foreseeable future operations, whereas BC CSR risk assessments typically anchor to current conditions unless a certificate of compliance is sought. The mistake I see most often is assuming one set of sampling locations satisfies both regulators. The fix is to run a gap analysis against the federal cumulative effects spatial boundary before mobilizing field crews. Tomorrow, watch for further details on federal provincial protected areas boundary coordination. That's environmental intelligence for today. If this briefing is useful to your practice, share it with a colleague and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back with the next briefing. Have a productive day. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets, each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Models and Agents, your daily briefing on AI models and agents. Find every show free at naranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.